They stood over you, didn't they? Not physically, emotionally. They didn't need to raise a hand. They just watched you react to everything. Every glance, every silence, every shift in tone. You couldn't help yourself. You were already dancing before the music even started. That's how they knew you weren't dangerous. Because you cared. You cared what they thought. You cared what they said behind your back. You cared whether they misunderstood you. You even cared when they didn't. You were exposed, not because you were weak, but because you were accessible. And that's what most people never see, that the true currency of power isn't control, it's distance. Not coldness, not arrogance, distance. The ability to remain unmoved when everyone else is begging for attention, applause, approval. You kept thinking if you explained yourself better, if you said the right words, if you showed enough proof they'd finally respect you. But that was your first mistake, because people don't respect what's always available. They don't value what they can predict, and they don't fear what they can read. They watch how you respond to chaos, how fast you speak when you're nervous, how many times you double text, how you flinch when silence enters the room. That's how they size you. And the truth is brutal. The more you feel the need to explain yourself, the more they know they own you. Psychological distance isn't about ignoring people. It's about becoming unreadable, inaccessible, disruptive to their emotional rhythm. It's about forcing them to confront your absence until they can't escape it. Not because you want them to chase you, but because you want them to question themselves. That's the Machiavellian edge. You don't ask for power. You starve them of your presence until your silence is louder than their entire personality. They call it cold. They call it selfish. They call it too much. But you didn't come here to be understood. You came to be unavailable to disrespect. Subscribe if that just hit your chest like a wall. They'll call you detached, but only after they fail to provoke you. Because here's what they hate the most: not your success, not your silence, not your strength. What they hate is that you no longer need their reaction to feel real. That's when the power flips. Because now they're the ones watching, waiting, calculating, and you're no longer predictable. You've become quietly dangerous. That's what psychological distance really is. It's not revenge. It's not a game. It's the removal of emotional accessibility from people who haven't earned it. See, emotional chaos is addictive. That's why they love triggering you. That's why they get louder when you go still. They want you reactive. They need you explainable, because as long as they can read you, they can use you. And when you start pulling back, they panic not because they miss you, but because they no longer control how you see yourself. Think about that. All those times they gave you backhanded compliments, all those sudden silences after you shared something vulnerable, all those quick pivots when you were speaking, like your presence was an interruption, not a contribution. It wasn't random. They weren't ignoring you. They were training you to overthink, to chase closure, to question yourself every time they disappeared. And you kept rewarding it, with patience, with empathy, with just one more chance. But what if I told you the most dangerous response isn't confrontation? It's withdrawal, not ghosting, not sulking, not emotional theatrics, but a surgical exit of energy. No announcement. No, you hurt me. No, I deserve better. Just a clean cut from the need to be seen. That's what they can't recover from. Not because you disappeared, but because they can't explain why it happened. You changed the pattern, and now their whole strategy collapses. You weren't supposed to grow a spine. You weren't supposed to stop reacting. You weren't supposed to make them feel unstable. But here you are still, unmoved, unavailable. The Machiavellian doesn't beg for clarity. He creates confusion. He thrives in restraint. He turns silence into a weapon. And here's the twisted beauty of it. You don't do it to hurt them. You do it to free yourself. There's a moment it doesn't come with fireworks. No clarity, no dramatic betrayal, just a switch. You wake up one day, and you're not mad anymore. Not obsessed, Not heartbroken. You're just done. The weight doesn't lift. You carry it differently. Because now, you don't care how they feel about your silence. You're not addicted to being the bigger person. You don't romanticize healing. You're not chasing closure like it owes you anything. You've tasted psychological distance, and it's clean. That's the real shift. When you stop trying to win and start choosing peace over noise, control over chaos, dignity over dialogue, it hits them in waves. First confusion, then curiosity, then anger, and finally, desperation. Because they'll come back. Oh, they always come back. Not because they've changed, not because they care, but because they lost control of the narrative. They'll poke, they'll provoke, they'll pretend. You'll get the, "How have you been?" messages. The, "I miss our conversations." The, "I've been thinking about you a lot lately." But if you bite, you're back in their game. You're back on the leash. And here's the most dangerous part. They don't want you back. They want your need for them back. The version of you that over-explains, that self-doubts, that tolerates psychological littering because you mistake endurance for loyalty. That version, you buried it. Because now you understand the Machiavellian doesn't scream. He disorients. He pulls back just far enough to make others spiral in their own emptiness. You don't confront them. You confront yourself forever, making their presence a measure of your worth. And when that inner confrontation is done, there's nothing left to prove. You're not hard. You're not bitter. You're clean. Because power isn't loud. Power is untouchable. And when you finally embody that, they feel it without you saying a word. You used to think they were strong. The way they walked into rooms like they owned them. The way their silence made you nervous. The way their approval felt like a reward, and their absence punishment. But now, with distance, you see it clearly. They weren't strong. They were just skilled at keeping you off balance. They didn't walk in power, they just knew you hadn't found yours yet. It was never about confidence. It was about your confusion, your emotional hunger, your need for permission to feel whole. And they fed on that, not because they were evil, but because they were weak, and weakness loves disguise. So they cloaked it in charm, wit, indifference, mystery, the illusion of options, the subtle power plays, always half present, half gone, enough to keep you craving, never enough to feel safe. That's how they stayed above you, not with dominance, but with inconsistency. They studied your patterns, your silences, your delays in texting back, your emotional tells. They learned when to disappear, when to reappear, when to whisper just enough to keep the leash tight. And you let it happen, not because you were naive, but because you were hungry. Hungry to be seen, to be chosen, to be held in a way that didn't feel like a performance. But here's the Machiavellian truth most can't stomach. You teach people how to play you by what you refuse to walk away from. And they played you because you made it easy. You handed them the code to your nervous system. Every smile, every overshare, every attempt to prove you were different. Every time you broke your own silence just to be understood. But now, that access is revoked. You stopped being an open window. You became a locked door. They don't get to know what you're thinking anymore. They don't get to trigger your responses. They don't get to predict when you'll come back. Because you are unpredictable now. Not impulsive. Not chaotic. Strategic. That's what they never expected. They thought they had more time, more leverage, more room to pull strings. But you cut the strings. And now they're left holding pieces of a game they can't play without you. They never expected you to stop explaining. They were addicted to your guilt, your defensiveness, your emotional transparency. But now your silence feels like a locked vault, and they hate it. Because here's what no one tells you. The moment you stop defending yourself, they start doubting themselves. That's the shift they can't process. Because as long as you're explaining, they're still in control, still the judge, still the one being answered to. But when you go quiet, not out of weakness, but presence, the game reverses. You're no longer on trial. They are. And they feel it. They feel it in the way your texts get shorter, in how your energy retracts without warning, in the absence of apologies you used to give just to keep the peace. They notice how you don't chase anymore, how you let conversations die mid-air, how you nod instead of justify, how your tone stopped asking for permission. You've become a psychological mirror, and they can't stand what's being reflected. Because without your emotional labor, they're forced to sit with the weight of their own behavior. No deflection, no distraction, just silence. The kind that burns. And maybe, just maybe, that was the lesson they were meant to learn. That your value was never in how much you gave. It was in how much they took for granted. But this isn't about them anymore. This isn't about revenge, or being seen, or finally getting that apology. This is about you becoming untouchable. Because real power is not reacting when your old self would have exploded. It's not that you've become colder. It's that you've become clearer. Clear on what gets access, what gets silence, what gets nothing. And now, they don't know where they stand with you. Good, because the moment they feel certain is the moment they try to tame you again. They used to feel safe around your insecurity, because it made them the center. Every time you doubted yourself, they felt taller. Every time you reached out, they felt chosen. Every time you over-explained, they felt superior. That's what people do when they know you haven't tasted your own power. They posture, they provoke, they perform stability while feeding off your instability. But now the energy has changed, and it terrifies them, because this new version of you, this version that no longer needs closure, that no longer chases clarity, that no longer tries to convince anyone of your worth, it's not chaotic. It's calm, and that calmness, that stillness, it feels like danger to those who once thrived off your chaos. They call it arrogance, but it's really just unfamiliarity. You used to be predictable, soft, manageable. Now you're unreadable. They don't know what you'll say. They don't know if you'll reply. They don't know what you feel. And worse, they don't know if you feel anything for them at all. That's the wound they can't stop scratching, because you've created a gap. A psychological distance so vast, so clean, so silent, that they don't know how to bridge it. They used to pull you in with guilt, with hints, with sudden vulnerability when they felt you slipping. But now, there's no hook, no leverage, no handle to grab onto. You've become untouchable, not by screaming louder, but by walking away without noise. That's what psychological detachment does. It doesn't make you the villain. It makes you free. Free from the games. Free from the mind traps. Free from the version of you that believed being chosen meant being loved. It never did. You weren't loved. You were used. Used to feel valid. Used to feel powerful. Used to feel in control. But now you don't serve that purpose anymore. You serve yourself. And that, to them, is the ultimate betrayal. Because they never thought you'd stop orbiting their gravity. They forgot. Machiavelli didn't teach power through connection. He taught it through distance. They'll never admit it. Not to you, not to themselves, not even in their most honest moments. But they felt it the instant you went still. The moment you stopped being emotionally available, something shifted in them. Something deep, something feral. Not love, not care, fear. Because they could feel it, that you'd left the conversation long before they noticed. You didn't slam the door, you didn't threaten to walk, you didn't beg them to change. You just disappeared, while sitting right in front of them. And that's psychological violence to the manipulative. They don't panic when you cry, they don't flinch when you scream, they don't even care when you say you're done, because they've heard it before. It's part of the script. But when you go quiet, truly quiet, without anger, without performance, without announcement, that's when the walls start closing in, because they realize. You see them now, not the version they presented, not the character they played. You see through them, and there's nothing more dangerous than someone who no longer seeks validation from a lie. You stopped reacting, stopped hoping, stopped decoding their mixed signals like they were sacred texts. Now you see what it was: manipulation wrapped in charm, emotional extortion disguised as love, power games decorated with intimacy. And once you've seen it, really seen it, you can't unsee it. You can't play dumb just to keep the peace. You can't shrink just to fit the illusion. You can't pretend to be confused when you're finally clear. So now you stare back, flat, detached, empty, not because you feel nothing, but because you've already felt everything and survived it. This isn't numbness. It's emotional evolution. You don't have the time, the bandwidth, or the dignity to keep bleeding for people who think your wounds are optional. That's psychological distance. You don't cut them off. You just stop giving them the version of you that was easy to hurt. And suddenly, they're the one confused. You stopped being their mirror, and that's why they're spiraling. Because people like that, the ones who build their worth through dominance, silence, praise, extraction, they don't have identities. They have reflections. They only know who they are when someone's reacting to them. That was your role. You gave them shape. Through your insecurity, through your emotion, through your endless proving. But now, without your reflection, they don't know what to become. That's why they'll try to bait you. They'll insult you subtly, praise you publicly, send you vague messages, pretend to move on. It's not affection. It's not growth. It's not love. It's survival. Because without your energy, they don't exist. And what most people miss is this: you don't win by becoming louder, or colder, or tougher. You win by no longer needing the game to feel real. That's what makes you dangerous. You've learned the lesson that burns the deepest. Not everyone deserves access to your nervous system. Not everyone deserves to know how you feel, how you think, how you process. They haven't earned it, and they never intended to. They were never with you. They were with who you were when you needed them. But you've outgrown that now. You no longer need them to reflect your value, because you don't need mirrors anymore. You are the room, and they feel it. In the way you speak less, in the way you stand straighter, in the way you pause before responding, as if measuring whether their presence even deserves your breath. They think you've changed, but you didn't change. You just remembered who you were before you were trained to forget. That's what psychological distance gives you. Not power over them, but sovereignty over yourself. And in a world addicted to reaction, there's nothing more terrifying than a person who refuses to perform. They thought you were kind. That was their mistake. You weren't kind. You were accommodating. And now that you've removed the accommodation, now that you've closed the door they thought they had the keys to, they're realizing it wasn't kindness at all. It was access. And it's gone. This is where the illusion collapses. Because people who confuse kindness with weakness, who mistake empathy for obedience, they can't handle your restraint. They need you loud, emotional, and explaining. They need to believe they're still in your mind, but you've starved them of oxygen, not by being cruel, not by being dramatic, by being unavailable, emotionally, psychologically, strategically. You used to rehearse the perfect response. You used to draft long messages in your head. You used to fantasize about finally being understood. Now, you don't even answer the phone, not out of pettiness, but because the version of you that would have cared doesn't exist anymore. And you won't resurrect them just to make someone else feel safe in their dysfunction. That's the final evolution, not when you go silent, but when their presence doesn't even register as noise, when their games feel like old theater, when their compliments feel like currency you no longer trade in. They sense it, that you're gone in a way they can't follow, and they'll try, through guilt, through charm, through shared memories, through checking in. But all they'll find now is distance. Not a wall, not a scream, just space. Empty, untouchable, irreversible. Because they weren't expecting to lose control, and they definitely weren't expecting to lose it to stillness. This is what they'll never understand. You didn't get stronger. You just stopped negotiating. You stopped opening your door to emotional thieves. You stopped giving psychological squatters permission to live in your head, rent-free. And that's the most Machiavellian move of all. Not revenge, not cruelty, just silence, and the discipline to maintain it. They'll rewrite the story. They have to, because if they ever told the truth that you left because they underestimated your ability to disappear without noise, they'd have to face something darker than abandonment, irrelevance. So they'll call you cold, unreasonable, dramatic. They'll tell people you switched up for no reason, that you ghosted, that you betrayed the connection. But let them talk. Let them build their narrative. Because people like them don't tell stories to reveal truth. They tell stories to survive exposure. They can't admit they lost control, that they pushed too far, that they played with someone who finally stopped playing back. So they dress it up in lies. That's fine, because when you master psychological distance, you stop needing to correct people's perception of you. You just let them choke on their own assumptions. They'll throw bait, say things like, "You've changed," or "I never expected this from you." But what they really mean is, "I don't know how to move you anymore." Good, because they shouldn't. Your emotions are not a public highway. Your peace is not a team sport. Your presence is not a guarantee. It's a privilege, and you stopped giving it to people who thought they were entitled to it. You've learned that true power isn't in being feared. It's in being missed without access. You're not silent because you have nothing to say. You're silent because they no longer deserve the sound of your voice. You're not distant because you don't care. You're distant because you finally do about yourself. That's the point. Psychological distance isn't about revenge, or strategy, or becoming a monster. It's about removal. The kind of removal that leaves no open door behind. The kind that doesn't wait to be understood. The kind that leaves people pacing in their own chaos, wondering how someone so nice, so loyal, so forgiving, could suddenly become invisible. But it wasn't sudden. It was built, quietly, patiently, ruthlessly. Every moment they thought you were tolerating them, you were taking notes. And when you left with all the information, all the leverage, and none of the emotion. That's how it ends. Not with fire, not with vengeance, just with an empty chair and silence they can't fill.